And greetings. Welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith on this Valentine's Day, February 14th, 2022. This channel is oriented to providing support and information, particularly to science students at the high school, college, graduate level, and even professors and professional researchers. So this channel can be very, very scholarly, and I try to keep it low drama. Ironically, some of the most web traffic that this channel has garnered has been kind of on whenever I've covered a topic that's rather scandalous. So those scandalous topics, even though they're good for viewer traffic, it's really not the bread and butter of this channel. So let me just double check that I have everything lined up. I need to just look at the comments section every now and then. And it's been my experience that the topic I'm covering today seems to generate the least interest. But it's a topic that's close to my heart and something I hope to be publishing on. So this is kind of a dress rehearsal and also kind of an extension. This session's kind of an extension for my thought process in the process of committing some of the ideas to writing. And so why did I do this? It sometimes it has been disturbing to me that I don't think that the topic of romantic love is, even in the Christian world, it's sort of denigrated. And that bothers me because it's something that's beautiful that God made. And it's not well understood and in the way that it affects our culture. So, sorry, I had to take care of a bot in the side chat. So, you know, that's, just make sure I took care of it. Okay. That's annoying. Can't get a stream going without being subject to these unfortunate distractions that provide no value to anyone except the perpetrators. So sorry to be on a bad note. And sometimes it feels from the pulpit that having these feelings is denigrated, and certainly a lack of empathy for people suffering through this sort of loneliness. And there are biological reasons that humans desire this. I mean, it's extremely, it's deeply wired into our biology, and it's something we're going to have to wrestle with, whether for better or worse, it's there. And I think it needs to be treated with more compassion. And the Bible teaches that it's very important to care for widows and orphans. And I think that's also an indication that the Lord recognizes how precious it is when husband and wife are together, and when death separates them, especially when the husband dies. That's very, very tragic for the widow. That's something very precious in God's eyes, that she's suffering, that she's lost something she has loved. And obviously we wouldn't denigrate that. Then how about singles, people who are single that are lacking a need being fulfilled? I mean, I can only imagine what a widow is going through. And I think that's a question I'd like to ask widows. You know, what's the loneliness of what you're experiencing after your husband passed away compared to what it was when you were single and longing to be married? I'd imagine it's considerably worse once one is widowed. But I think I think it's just an interesting question. Uh, uh, and I have been sometimes uh, a little bit disturbed from the pulpit that um, people are considered weak or, less committed to the Lord because um, they're longing for someone. Now, that being said, it doesn't mean that one should necessarily pursue um, a partner depending on one's station in life and the conditions in the situation. Um, and certainly there's no question that very poor choices can be made as far as the pursuit of romance. So um, this show is not really to address how to live happily ever after. In fact, I'm going to point out why, according to the Bible, sadly, happily ever after it's not going to happen in this life because this world was cursed by God. And so yet we are cursed in the sense we still have longing for happily ever after, but then it doesn't happen. Can you imagine a more difficult situation? And the question then will arise, well, why would God do this? And then also, how can we deal with this as given the situation? And I'm not saying that I have the best answers to these questions, but I'm hoping that I have a better perspective than some of the stuff I've been hearing, even in Christendom, about these topics. So, first off, it is Valentine's Day, and toward the end of my stream yesterday, I will make this announcement. A lady, a frequent visitor, and a very lovely lady, she announced her engagement, and she got engaged this weekend, and I'm happy for her. I'm a little sad for the rest of us guys who weren't so lucky. Um, so, but I wish her the very best. And that was on my stream on blog surfing and memes by Arthur, and also the blog by Mike Jean. So in that stream, um, the engagement was announced, and many congratulations and many happy years to you. So let me share my screen, and I'm just gonna share some thoughts here and then some scriptures. So whenever I'm in lack of material, I will turn to the scriptures. In fact, I should turn to the scriptures first. But what I'm saying is trying to lead up to the scriptures. So why don't I read from this book, Why We Love, The Nature and Chemistry of Romantic Love by Helen Fisher. Now, some of you know a frequent guest here is Dr. Dan, and he is a professor at Rutgers University. The author of this book is one of his colleagues, although Dr. Dan tells me he's not seen Dr. Fisher on campus. She may well be a visiting professor, and she may not appear there much. She would be in the anthropology or evolutionary biology department. I've sometimes said, if there's anyone that could have made me an evolutionist, it would be Dr. Helen Fisher or Dr. Jordan Peterson. And so here's a picture of Helen Fisher there. Lovely woman. So how did she get on this topic of love? It's actually hard to find the explanation anymore on the internet because it's been lost. She was married at a young age, then got divorced after only 6 months. From that point on, she was searching to find answers about trying to figure out what happened to her and the nature of love. So let me read a passage from her book, Puppy Love. And she actually quotes someone else in this passage. In her groundbreaking book, The Hidden Life of Dogs, Elizabeth Marshall Thomas maintained that dogs show deep romantic passion for one another. She arrived at this conclusion moments after she introduced Misha, a handsome Siberian husky, to her daughter's young and beautiful dog of the same breed, Maria. Thomas had agreed to house Misha while his owners were on an extended trip to Europe. The day arrived, Misha's owners delivered this vibrant male to the Thomas home. Misha pranced into the living room to look about, settling his gaze immediately on the gorgeous Maria. In an instant, he bounded to her feet and skidded to a stop. At once, Thomas writes, Maria dropped her elbows in an invitation to play. Chase me, her gesture said, and he did. Quickly, lightly, the two delighted creatures spun around the room. Misha and Maria were so taken with each other that they noticed nothing. Misha didn't even notice when his owners left. These two joyous dogs were immediately inseparable. Together they ate and slept and roamed. Together they bore 4 hardy pups. Together they reared them, until the dark day when Misha's owners gave him away to people in the countryside. For weeks, Maria sat in the window seat of the Thomas home in the very spot where she had watched her beloved Misha being forced into a car. Here she pined. Eventually she gave up waiting for him to return. But Maria never recovered from her loss, Thomas writes. She lost her radiance and showed no interest in forming a permanent bond with another male, even though over the years several eligible males joined our household. Yeah, I know that's a sad story. But the point is, this is the theme of romantic love in the animal kingdom is deeply ingrained. The theme of male and female is a beautiful thing, and it even exists. Strangely, it exists where it can't be directly explained by common descent. The evolutionary biologists would call this convergence, I believe. So if any evolutionary biologists are out there, please correct me if I'm wrong. But like in the plant species, for example, they talk about kind of the ovum and sperm. And, you know, that it's like, how did that happen? Did ovum and sperm independently evolve in plants? And then you had a parallel evolution in animals? That's an interesting question, and I'd be curious. So maybe I should ask Emery Moyna about that one. So in this book, Helen Fisher also talks about how even cockroaches, they'll kind of snuggle up together each other, and they'll start stroking each other's antennas. And so this is deeply wired, these behaviors. And to the extent, even if one accepts universal common ancestry, which I don't, do we have examples where it's convergence, where this pattern of male and female in romance independently came about? It's like it was designed. And so her book also talks about the biochemistry of romantic love. She had studied brain scans of people in love and tried to understand the biochemistry. Well, okay, that's actually a good question. I believe you're talking about the passages that Helen Fisher was writing about. One way that it might be objectively measured in terms of intensity is with things like brain scans or being able to measure the state of the nervous system, we do know, I mean, people can articulate how they feel, but it's really powerful when you see the brain scans, and to whatever extent we can measure the biochemistry, we can know objectively it's a different state. So actually, now that you raised the question, and it would be an interesting one to have more objective studies on animals. So this is an excellent question, and let me just say, I'll just speculate that I think it'll be borne out if we do with animals, but I don't have anything concrete at this point. However, let me let me Google something. Let me just Google something here. And then I will share it. Just one moment. See if I can find the particular Chrome tab. All right, so here is one. Here's one diagram that compares, like, say, maternal love versus romantic love. And one can see there are differences. And then there is, let me then share a scan of in love versus not in love. And I think this is just, I would hope more research along these lines is done. Okay, so let me just put this up here. And I'll just share my, let me kill this screen here. Let me do a stop share and I'll reshare. Just give me a moment because it's a little hard when I have to run all this by myself, especially if it's on the fly here. So here's a brain scan of and so Helen Fisher would look at scans like this. So I find that she found this compelling. So if there are measurable states in the brain, I mean, you can obviously see that there was a behavioral change in the dog, and so there would be more studies done, to study this in animals. So the question would arise then, is this all purely chemical? And I think she gave a very she gave a very compelling answer. She said, well, just because you can reduce a picture to just colors on paper, or music to just vibrations in the air, does it denigrate what's really there? And if one is a materialist and a total reductionist, it's like, well, I guess their answer would be yes. But if one believes that this is a representation of something transcendent and beyond the natural world, I'd say no. So when you look at a photograph or a painting, you don't examine the chemistry of it. I mean, you could, when you're scanning it and pixelizing it, you could reduce it to a variety of colors and intensity. But the picture is meaningful because it's something beyond the pure chemistry is in play. So, that's what I have to say on that. Now, I will try to address this. I think it's well confirmed, books by John Roughgarden before he had his transition to Joan Roughgarden. It's not really the sort of book I would read, but he studied the sexual behaviors of all sorts of animals. And I think he established that there were definitely homosexual relationships in the animal kingdom. The sentiment among some Christians who are creationists that I know is that the animal kingdom was also corrupted, that therefore these behaviors emerged. And in fact, if you look at the primate kingdom, what one creationist told me, he said, Sal, they may look cute, but they are a picture of what we humans are if we are not constrained from our sins, the sort of behaviors we will degenerate into. So I would not rule out that some of these behaviors are indeed kind of things that Christians would frown on. So I'm trying to, I'm not saying that our biochemistry is right or wrong. It's corrupted. It says in the Bible, the sources of temptation are the world, the flesh, and the devil. The world, the flesh, and the devil. Okay, I know this is concerning to you. This is a family-friendly channel. I really don't want to get into the details, okay? Please. I try to minimize this discussion. And besides, I entertained this for enough. We're way off topic at this point. And you can disagree. That's fine. I can't keep responding to everything along that topic because otherwise I won't get to the main topic. But it says we have the world, the flesh, and the devil that are the source of temptation and leading us toward sin. So I'll give even kind of a little bit more innocuous example. Let's say you're very hungry, or even probably more painfully, let's say your family is hungry. One might be tempted to steal. Or how about this? In the times of severe persecution, the way they try to get Christians to confess, to deny their faith, is they'll torture a loved one. So I heard an account, and I don't recall the details, but you can imagine that somewhere a situation like this was true. They took a Christian father and they started torturing his son in front of him and demanding he deny the Christian faith. What are you going to do? What are you going to do if you're a Christian? I mean, this is, I know that's painful. To love your child is a beautiful thing. It's something that might actually even intrinsically be good, can be a source of temptation in this corrupted world. And you know, what about the families, the early Christian families? The father would raise his child to be a Christian, and he knew that persecution could lead to both of them dying. See, there's a lot of, it's challenging enough if you're the one being persecuted, but what about someone you deeply care for? Are you going to encourage them to deny the faith because you can't bear to see them suffer and be tortured for professing the Lord? And so I'm just pointing out that there are a lot of things about the way we're wired. You can't just say that it's bad from the start. It could be used for good. It could be used for bad. Often it does lead to temptations, and we don't deny that. But in terms of an original design, it wasn't a bad thing to care about someone. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So let me share this slide of C.S. Lewis so that the title of this talk is The Honeymoon That Should Have Lasted Forever. And let me just see how I structured this, just so I can follow through with what I promised. Okay, so I said if one is a creationist, one automatically believes in intelligent design, but the converse is not necessarily true. One could believe in ID, but not in creationism, like Michael Behe. And so creationism, Christian creationism, comes with a lot of theology to it. Adam and Eve could have lived out a honeymoon that lasted forever, but then they sinned by wanting to be God, and therefore they did not love God with all their heart and all their soul. And I'll answer, why would God allow them to sin? And I've been really dissatisfied with some of the answers I've heard from fellow Christians or people claiming to be Christians. And this also ties to something else. And I'll try to kind of tie these different threads of thought. So why would God create something so beautiful and just let it evaporate? And that's one of the questions that I'll try to answer. But let me just lay out some things in human experience here, first off. It's not well known, but C.S. Lewis, there's a movie called Shadowlands. It's about, and you could see the advertisement there, one of the most extraordinary love stories of our time. And I think there's a C.S. Lewis movie that came out last year, and it didn't really get the best reviews. But this one got very good reviews. It talks about C.S. Lewis's romantic relationship with this woman. I don't even remember her actual name. The woman's played by Deborah Winger. And I believe, I'm just guessing here, that this is a quote by C.S. Lewis himself. Now, there were some things said in the movie that are attributed to him, and I can't vouch for that. So I don't know whether this is from the movie or this is from one of his writings. If there's a C.S. Lewis scholar out there, I would appreciate finding out if this is in his own words. It does sound like him. So C.S. Lewis says, Why love if losing hurts so much? I have no answers anymore. Only the life I have lived. Twice in that life I've been given the choice, as a boy and as a man. The boy chose safety, the man chooses suffering. The pain now is part of the happiness then. That's the deal. The pain now is part of the happiness then. That's the deal. And in the movie, there's a scene where C.S. Lewis and his wife, she's diagnosed with cancer, and they know the clock's running out. And she tries to they try to console each other. It was pretty powerful because the clock's running out, and I don't know. I don't remember the dialogue. I wish I did, but that line was said by his wife in the movie. She said, let me get the quote back. She said, "The pain now is part of the happiness then. That's the deal." And so the context was he was worrying how he's gonna cope when she's gone, and she's reminding him that the happiness they're sharing, that's the price. Then in the future, then being in the future, the price of the happiness they share at this moment when she's still alive, the price will be that the agony he's going to go through when she's gone. Just powerful, very powerful. And this raised, there's a even more interesting love story that they've never made into a movie that actually does relate to C.S. Lewis. And it's this one. Oh goodness, my screen's all messed up now. Let me just shut this one off for time being and expand this. A Severe Mercy by Sheldon Vonnegut, and it includes 18 previously unpublished letters by C.S. Lewis. This is a real-life story full of wonder and hope. Now, 40 years ago, around the time I was a relatively new Christian, a girl in my prayer group was talking about this book, and being the incurable romantic I am, I couldn't help but want to read it. And the couple were pagans. They met as pagans, they fell in love as pagans, they became Christians, the wife first, and then the husband. And then he noticed that she started to, her attentions were divided, and that bothered him. It seemed that Christ was more and more her focus and he less. And this is a very interesting dynamic. And then she passes away, she gets ill and passes away. And he's writing C.S. Lewis during this whole time. After she passes away, it wouldn't be much longer that C.S. Lewis has to go through the same ordeal with a wife that is dying. And in the case of C.S. Lewis, I don't think they were married very long, maybe 4 years. And so this book was very, I think of any romance book that kind of puts human love in perspective and in the Christian walk, I would have to put this one kind of at the top, because it's kind of just out there. You know, it kind of tells it like it is. It doesn't sugarcoat the good and the bad. You know, it does, to the extent that it coincides with the Christian faith, great. And to the extent it doesn't, it highlights that too. And so let me just read a passage from here, and he's describing his early years. He writes, Davy, her name is Jane Davison, I think. So his nickname for her was Davy, which is a boy's name. Okay, but her name is Jane, but his nickname for her is Davy. Davy and I called ourselves agnostics, but we were really theists. A creator seemed necessary, a creator with an immense intelligence embracing order. Apart from reason, the one quality that we attributed to this creative power was awareness of beauty. Everything in nature, in creation, was beautiful, except where marred by man. But we could not, or at least did not, similarly attribute goodness to it. For good was in man, not in wild nature, and was balanced by evil, also in man. So there was a power, a God of beauty, and a high and inscrutable purpose, quite unknowable to man, except for such inklings as might come through the contemplation of beauty. Beauty was somehow at the very center of meaning. For us, love was an aspect of beauty, though that might not be true of the power, which perhaps cared nothing for man. We might acknowledge a creating power, but our religion, if it could be called that, was really an adoring of love and beauty. It was the domain of Aphrodite, and as I have said, we were really pagans. Many an ancient philosopher, and even more, many a Hellenic lyric poet would have approved, or at least sympathized with, our dedication to love and beauty, our trust in reason, and our goal of the life, our goal of the good life. So there we have again this desire, this innate desire for happily ever after. And I wrote in the video description, ID says, intelligent design says life is intelligently designed. Creationism says life is intelligently designed, but also cursed and in need of a savior. Creationism says life is intelligently designed, but also cursed and in need of a savior. So in their pagan days, they're seeing this intelligence that had built beauty and the relationship between man and woman, and they're celebrating it, and they're pursuing the good life. So you could see even a pagan can sense intelligent design. But Christian creationism goes one step farther and said, yes, there's intelligent design, but this world is broken, it's cursed. Your pursuit of the good life will ultimately fail. And so how did they deal with suffering? Well, thank God, first of all, they became Christians, because they were talking about committing suicide together while they were still healthy. I mean, seriously, you know, they just wanted to end it. They're contemplating ending their lives together so that they could kind of end on a happy note. If it's not a very happy note, but I hope you could, I'm not justifying what they were trying to do. I'm trying to just say this is their reasoning. And when they became Christians, they began to embrace suffering a little more. Now, going back to this about C.S. Lewis, about C.S. Lewis. Oops, let me bring it back up. The pain now is part of the happiness then. That's the deal. Now, let me see if the next slide has a scripture. I'm going to then compare and contrast it to the scripture. For this momentary light affliction is building for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. For this momentary light affliction is building for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond comparison. So what does the Bible do with what C.S. Lewis is going through? First off, C.S. Lewis did write a book entitled The Weight of Glory. He actually uses this verse, these words from this verse, the weight of glory. And that's the name of one of his books. I think ironically, though, it actually didn't elaborate very much on this particular verse in the way I might have hoped that he would. Okay, so in this life, the pain now is paid for in the future. I'm sorry, the happiness now is paid for by the suffering in the future. Right? In this world, the happiness you experience now is paid for by the misery you have in the future. And he's referring to, like, okay, I mean, you could extend this to anything. It's like, you know, when you've had a really good time and the party's over, it's a letdown. I mean, you're glad you had a good time and you may reminisce, but it's not as good. And certainly, you know, as I was trying to convey in these love stories here, like with Sheldon Vonnegut and C.S. Lewis, the happiness that they had it came at a price. What Paul does and what God is teaching us through Paul, in Paul's words, it's the reverse. The happiness you have in the future is paid by two things. The most important thing is Jesus Christ is paid for your sins. His suffering makes possible your happiness. So that the happiness in the future is paid by the pain of something that happened in this world. In our case, it's an event that happened in the past, Christ on the cross. The second thing is this verse. This momentary light affliction is building for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. So there are two components to the happiness in the future. The most important being Christ's suffering on the cross on behalf of those who believe in him. But then secondarily, and much more secondarily, but it's still important in helping us understand our suffering, is this light affliction, you know, kind of the not so pleasant things or painful things in our life, is building for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. So why do I share that? All of us can think of tragic things happening to people, and especially Christians. And people ask, well, why would God allow that? I'll give a partial answer is that verse in 2 Corinthians 4:17. For this momentary light affliction is building for us an eternal weight of glory. That's a partial answer. And there are some things that are, if you think about this, it is a little disturbing. That verse applies only to Christians. For unbelievers, there's no consolation to be offered for unbelievers, because the momentary light affliction that they may experience in this life, it doesn't add anything to them when they're in eternal torment, punished forever. And in fact, one can read the Sermon on the Mount or on the Plain where Jesus talks about people that had their consolation in this life. Kind of the price of them being happy in this life, it'll be paid for by eternal torment if they're unbelievers. So, but there's a principle here. Happiness comes at a price. Happiness comes at a price. And doing, these atheists sometimes will pose the question, and I think they're very smart to raise the question, why would God allow suffering? And Christians, by and large, I just like, sometimes I think the answer is right there and you're just dodging the issue. You're not coming out with something that's, I think, it was never satisfying to me, and I had to kind of dig for myself, and I had to think about this. And this verse here got me thinking. I said, can this verse apply and help us understand other things? Well, think about and I'll cover this verse in Deuteronomy a little later. Consider Snow White. The story goes there was Snow White, and she was very beautiful, and she had an evil queen stepmother. The stepmother, there's a Disney version. So this was from one movie rendition of Snow White. This was from the cartoon rendition. There's the evil queen, and in the mirror she's really an ugly witch, but the queen's very jealous of Snow White's beauty. She plots to kill Snow White because the queen wants to be the fairest in the land, and she succeeds in poisoning Snow White with that apple here, and there's Snow White dead in the casket. So what happens? Well, you can see the little dwarfs here. They're all mourning her death. And as they're transporting her in the casket, one of the elves, or one of the dwarfs stumbles. Snow White coughs out the apple, and she comes back to life. So the prince, encounters her when she's already dead, had fallen in love, but then now she comes back to life. They go on to get married. On their wedding day, the evil queen stepmother appears and tries to disrupt the wedding, and the prince takes care of her and has the evil queen stepmother killed. And then they live happily ever after. But I want you to see that there is I'm sorry, wrong way. There's an interesting parallel to the Christian story. I just want you all to just kind of step back for a little bit and just think about this. And I posed this question when I actually went through and read the whole Wikipedia entry on Snow White. I posed the question to a woman in my prayer group after I read it to the prayer group. I said, would the story be as beautiful if we removed the evil queen stepmother? Immediately she said, no, it's sterilized. I said, exactly. The price of the beautiful happy ending was paid for by kind of some of the tragedy along the way. I mean, just think about that. Just every artist kind of knows this instinctively, that the price of a happy ending is a little bit of pain. And you can't run away from that. I mean, it's just like in the fabric of reality. And I'm just like, a lot of Christians don't seem to it's like it's right there in the Bible. This momentary light affliction is building for us an eternal weight of glory. There's a connection between the suffering you have. First off, there's a connection between the suffering Christ and then the suffering you have that pays the price for the eternal weight of glory. That's scriptural. I mean, all right, so I feel I'm on good grounds if it says it in the Bible. And I think I'm interpreting it correctly. But we could see this play out in so much of our literature, in so many plots. And so, um, so just hold on. That's part of the explanation for the problem of evil. And I said it's a partial explanation. So why would God allow, all right, so going back to this here, why love if losing hurts so much? And I'll just get back. The pain now is part of the happiness then. That's the deal. But for the Christians, this is reversed. The pain now is part of the future happiness. So the way C.S. Lewis phrased this, you could read it either way. Oh my! I just realized that in the movie they may have reversed this. Did I misread this? Oh my goodness! In the movie it said the happiness now is part of the pain then, or something like that. C.S. Lewis gets this correct. The pain now is part of the happiness then. I think where this quote comes from is after she had died. The pain now, that is now at this point he's grieving after his wife died. The pain now is part of the happiness back then. Okay, so the movie misquotes it. All right, I was so confused. Apologies to the viewers. That's a problem with when you get your information from the Hollywood version and not from the original. So I believe this was from a book he wrote as part of his grieving process. Okay. All right. All right. Well, anyway, you have the passage in Corinthians. So now the atheists and skeptics will rightly say, well, why did God let Satan into the Garden of Eden? And I was actually shocked that some Christians didn't even consider that. When they were confronted with it, one Christian told me, she said, I didn't even think of that. I'm just like, that's kind of a problem that you didn't think about that, because that's a real hang up for a lot of people. I mean, to me, that's such an obvious complication that needs to be resolved. And most Christians, I mean, one reason I nearly left the faith 20 years ago is I had these kinds of questions and I never got a satisfactory answer. It was usually just beating around the bush. And worse, I didn't feel that they used much scripture. So now let me address this point. And I think a picture says it all. So God makes this paradise. Orthodox theology, as far as I know, says that before there was a Garden of Eden, that Satan had already fallen from heaven. Now, when I read Genesis, I don't read anything about Satan having fallen from heaven. But it does say, I think somewhere in the prophecies, it talks about the devil that was there at the beginning in Eden and how he'd fallen. So, however this plays out, God creates this paradise for Adam and Eve, and he allows the devil to make his sales pitch to them. God could have easily prevented the devil from approaching them. Why did God allow that? And is there any scripture that gives us a hint as to why? Of course, the atheists will confront Christians on this, and almost all the time I just see them stumble on this, and it's like, why don't you read the scriptures, particularly Deuteronomy. And I think I'm the first Christian to really advocate this passage. Deuteronomy 13. If a prophet or a dreamer of dreams arises among you and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or wonder that he tells you comes to pass, and if he says, let us go after other gods, which you have not known, and let us serve them, you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams. For the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. I'll read it again. If a prophet or a dreamer of dreams arises among you and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or wonder that he tells you comes to pass, and if he says, let us go after other gods, which you have not known, and let us serve them, you shall not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer of dreams. For the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. There is something about this passage that Christians and atheists don't appreciate. Was creation, was all that was created, Eden, all the animals, the universe, was that created for the pleasure of man or the glory of God? Is God going to create the universe just so man could be happily ever after? What's the priority of God? Him, his glory, and what pleases him. God was looking for love, for true love. I mean, that may sound like a shocking statement, but it's right here. For the Lord your God is testing you to know whether you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. He wanted a demonstration of true love toward him. So as human beings, it's interesting, you see all the amount of energy people expend to find true love. I don't think that's an accident. That's a picture of what God was seeking here. He was seeking true love. It is something that was valuable to him as it is to humans. More so. So much so that he's going to risk seeing the world just blow apart. Because this passage in Deuteronomy, it's before they enter the promised land. And God could make that promised land and make sure there are no false prophets. But he's letting them come in to the promised land and letting them have a chance to make their sales pitch. And so God's people then were at risk of rejecting him. By way of extension, you could see then this is finally explained. Why did God let the devil there? He's testing them. And so the atheists will say, well, why do you do that? Because now we're miserable. It's because God was looking for true love. His priority was not our eternal happiness. Okay, that may be tough medicine to hear. His priority is his glory and his seeking of love. And so the first Adam failed the test. The first Adam failed the test. It says in the New Testament that Jesus was the second Adam. He would join sinful man to himself, his blood. What I mean by join, he says he indwells the life of believers. And so his church is transformed, and it's referred to as the body of Christ, into something that would love God perfectly. And it describes the church in very romantic language in the book of Revelation. It's called the bride of Christ. Now, when we look at the church and we see these people in church, and there are a variety of ages and different circumstances, we won't think of them as a beautiful bride. And excuse me, what God is trying to say, though, by using this romantic language, of a bride, is that in his eyes, and at the end of time, the church will be something extraordinarily beautiful. And the only thing that in this world that we can compare it to is a beautiful bride. And so then going back to this book by Helen Fisher, where she's talking about the biochemistry and the neuroscience of romantic love. Is this just all chemicals and kind of in a very reductionistic viewpoint, or does it point? Is it a pattern that reflects something higher? And I will argue it's a pattern that reflects something higher. For one, because life is obviously a miracle at this point, and that's the subject of a lot of talks on this channel. When Origin of Life researchers went from saying we've almost solved the problem to invoking extraterrestrials, and now that they're invoking multiple universes as an explanation, anything but God, as far as I personally am concerned, the scientific method has shown us that life on Earth is a miracle. The details can be argued, and they have been, and they will continue to be argued, that life is a miracle. Something outside the universe has created life. Because and there have been studies on this, that the laws of physics and the existing boundary conditions do not have the sufficient organization, or dare I say information content, to construct life. It just won't happen naturally. It had to come from a source outside. So the patterns we see are something that transcends the universe, and it's not an accident. And so if we view romantic love as something special, it is. But in this present world, it's very, very corrupted. It's just like taking a photograph, and you can distort it all sorts of ways. The original pattern now has become dysfunctional. But what does this point to? It points to a love, the perfect love that God was seeking in the Garden of Eden, that will be finally found in the end of the book of Revelation. So the book of Genesis opens with God seeking perfect love. Now, you don't realize that. One might not see that in this passage in Genesis, but it becomes clear in Deuteronomy what God is trying to do. Okay? I recognize people will totally disagree with me, some of them, in my use of Deuteronomy to project that to Genesis, but I think that is, you can't run away from what Deuteronomy 13 says. You can't run away from the fact God is allowing false prophets, deliberately allowing them to enter, to test people's hearts. And then in Acts 20, the Apostle Paul says for 3 years, he prayed with tears because he knew wolves were coming into the church. And as we deal with wolves in the church, it's like, God, why? I mean, shouldn't the church be a pure place on earth? And God's going to allow the same thing that he allowed in Deuteronomy 13 and really basically at the Garden of Eden. He's testing hearts who will love him with all their heart and all their soul. And may the Lord help us all to love him as he calls us to do through the power of Jesus Christ. So then let me just, I think, all right, so we covered that passage, and let me then offer some thoughts, how this plays out in our culture. Oh boy, this doesn't work like StreamYard, so forgive me. I have to adjust with Restream. So how does this play out in our culture? As I said in the book Severe Mercy, Sheldon Vonnegut and his wife were considering ending their lives while they were still happy and in love and beautiful. So what is the fall of man? What are the consequences? One, obviously we die. So if Adam had not sinned, it would have been a honeymoon that would have lasted forever. That's one. But in the way the book of Revelation ends, it ends with a wedding, with the implication the honeymoon does last forever. The one romance that will last forever is between Jesus Christ and the bride of Christ, which is the church. That's the one true romance that will last forever. That picture is written in biology on a number of levels, in that image of husband and wife, a man and a woman, is precious in God's eyes. It is something that is emphasized as his design of now and forever. Now that's approximated with till death do us part in this life, but really it points to something. It's meant to be eternal. It's a picture of something that should just last and last. And so that desire for happily ever after, it's not accidental, but you can't let it, I'm just saying that it's a very intense desire that's wired into our biology, and we have to sometimes we have to deal with it because it leads us down wrong paths. And what do I mean? Often it's really kind of sad, a girl will fall in love with a guy that's just the wrong guy for her, and the parents and friends will try to discourage her, or definitely the parents, and they see it and she'll rebel. She ends up with a guy and she's miserable afterward. It says in the Bible that the heart is very deceitful, and you can be deceived and make very unwise choices. So something that was originally intended for good ends up driving a person to try to find happily ever after in this life, and it just leads to their ruin. So I do think literally that there was a cherub. It says when God cast him out of the Garden of Eden, he put a cherub to defend the way back to the earthly paradise. Why would he put a cherub there? Because the desire to go back to Eden was pretty strong, okay? So I would say then that is still written in Adam and Eve's descendants. We are longing for happily ever after on this earth. It's very hard to run away from that. And it drives a lot of our, the way we conduct our lives, and we have to be careful about that. There is a quote by Marcel Proust, and he says a lot of half-truths that sound very profound, and there is one where he got one that was almost right. And And so let me quote it, and I'm not saying it's the best worded, okay? It could be said better, but I think it's a starting point, and I'll rephrase it the way I think is a little more accurate. Proust says, and as far as I know, he's an atheistic philosopher, so just, it's not that I'm endorsing his writings on the whole. I think some of the stuff he says is awful, but he kind of gets kind of close to the point I was trying to make. It is our imagination that is responsible for love, not the other person. It is our imagination that is responsible for love, not the other person. And so now I'll just say, okay, how would I kind of like amend this to make it a little more accurate? I mean, it's kind of poetically said there, and that's kind of why I like it. And I think in the case of the girl that is just really starry-eyed over the bad boy who ends up just ruining her life, she didn't fall in love with him. She fell in love with the thing that she imagined him to be. And a lot of people fall in love with the person that they imagine, not the person that is really there. I mean, that's just kind of how it works, you know. You um, um, to use, sorry to be a nerd, to use statistical language, the sample size wasn't sufficient. Okay, you just, you know, they fall in love. People tend to just, you know, we're in that neurological state. They tend to just look at all the good things and eliminate the bad because it makes them feel good. It makes them feel good. And we are wired to try to keep ourselves feeling good. And one way that a romantic couple can start to feel good is they cover up, they ignore the bad and only look at the good. I mean, that's actually kind of, you know, uh, the book of Corinthians on the chapter of love talks about, you know, love thinks the best, not the worst. Okay. But when it comes to making decisions about life partners, okay, before you give away your heart, you should have your eyes wide open to their flaws and incompatibilities. So this is how the desire for Eden is still written in our hearts. And so when you see all the literature written about love and happily ever after, and you know, the bride wanting to have photographs to kind of preserve that, it's ingrained in us. And I wouldn't say that it was that design was originally bad. I'm pointing out it's corrupted, but it does tell us something of where we came from, which was Eden, and then the problems in human affairs tells us we're fallen and in need of a savior. But the picture of our imagination does point to the final state of reality, where God in Jesus Christ being the groom, and the bride of Christ being the church. And I don't think that the metaphors used in Revelation are accidental. In fact, I haven't been able to find any absolute justification in Scripture to justify what I'm about to say. So this is, just take it as a speculation. I think God created male and female to be the pattern of male and female and husband and wife to be a metaphor for God and his people, God and his creation. And that's why Christian marriage, as taught in the Bible, is very, very, very sacred to the Lord. And welcome here. That's an interesting, I never thought about that. Jamie Russell, greetings. And redeemed and not reformed. Oh, yes. I think I recognize. Yeah, greetings, greetings. Nice to see you. So, why did I bring this up? You know, because sometimes in Christian literature, it's like, well, the love between romantic love isn't really love, and I'm just like, I don't know how to deal with that. It's like if you see a picture of someone, you're not going to say, well, no, that's not really them or her. Granted, it's a picture, but what I'm trying to say is the picture of love between a man and a woman is a picture of something higher. Just recognize the picture is corrupted. And in the word agape in Greek, I learned this because I had a friend from Cyprus. She calls herself Greek because, you know, it's a connected culture, so she identifies herself as Greek. When she calls to her husband, she says, my love. She says, agape moi, which means my love. So the word agape in the Bible is the same word she uses to endear, to express her affection for her husband, calls him my love. And the word she uses is agape. So, you know, I'm sometimes a little disconcerted when I hear Christians talking about, you know, agape is that special godly love. I'm just like, that's not the way it's used in the language. In fact, when it says the love of money, it uses the word agape, or a word that has the same connection to our word. Or when it says in the Gospels, they loved the approval of men rather than the approval of God. They loved the approval of men. The word is agape. I'm just pointing out that even in a corrupted context, it does point to something higher. We just have to recognize when something is corrupted, but it had an origin that was pure. So something can start out pure and be corrupted. It still has some of the remnants of the good in it. So those are my thoughts there. So I had some other books that I wanted to share that are now kind of off topic, and I will share some scriptures. I have, I don't know quite how to say this. You know, before my mother died, I was thinking about getting married, and it was on my mind. My mom, God bless her, before my 2 years, about 2 years before Dad died, I was taking Mom and Dad and a girl I really was in love with out to watch figure skating. So it was the four of us, and we were at the subway station, and Mom was already starting to, you know, have problems walking, and Dad was very weak. And of course, when I'm in the house and I see Mom needing a little help, I will come up and kind of grab her arm just to make sure that, you know, she doesn't fall. I mean, you hear about, it's the polite thing to help an old lady. To help an old lady across the street, you escort her and kind of help her along. Well, she was starting to struggle physically, and it's just a habit that if I see her not walking too fast, I'd always stop myself and try to help her. It's just really strong instinct. Well, we were in the subway, and then Stephanie would be, and I being younger, we were walking a little faster, and every now and then I would turn and check on Mom, and because I was just concerned, she scolded me several times. Each time I did that, she got mad. She said, "You take care of Stephanie, I'll be all right. You take care of Stephanie, I'll be all right." So even when we were ordering concessions or whatever, it's just kind of the force of habit. I'd defer, I'm concerned about Mom's health or comfort. She'd scold me again. I got scolded so many times that night. Okay, when Stephanie and I are alone, of course, I would just shower her with attention. But Mom was trying to get me out of the habit of not, attending to Mom first versus her. And that really did tell me something, that if I had ever, especially after Dad died, I know what Mom would have done if I had gotten married. She would have gone to a nursing home and been alone. She would not have tolerated me not giving 100% to my wife. That's because my dad gave 100% to her on many levels. I've recounted the story that Mom and Dad met as children, and World War II happened, and Dad was a war hero. He fought in battles that I've recounted here. The battle at Tagaytay, and after the war, he and Mom got reacquainted. And there was one incident where an armed attacker was harassing Mom. The attacker was, I don't know, the way they handle women, okay, is pretty disgusting. That, like, if you want them, you just take them. And so this armed attacker was really coercing my Mom. And Dad saw what was going on, had an argument. Dad was totally unarmed. And I don't know all the details, but he finally said, you're going to have to kill me first before you get to her. You're going to have to kill me first before you get to her. That instinct was very strong to lay down his life for my mother, and the attacker relented because, that would have been really bad. So Dad stood up, and it says in Ephesians, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself for her." And so Dad lived that out. And obviously my dad's bravery and other things about him won my mother's heart. And so Mom would have expected the same of me. She would not have tolerated me doting on her. She would want me to give 100%. And I think that would have torn me up if I'd gotten married while she was in her season of widowhood for 18 years. I really do think it would have torn me up. And so the idea of marriage was off the table. And I know that Mom would want me to be happy. And, now that I'm older, just suffice to say that I've started contemplating the possibility. It's a little harder because I don't, at this age, for one, I don't believe in marrying a woman that's already divorced. It's nothing against her. I mean, my heart would ache, but for her. But I won't marry a divorced woman, and there are really not many women close to my age who've not been married yet. So this is kind of hard for me to contemplate this. That being said, this theory that I've been thinking about, and I actually got kind of it's a little, it's a little hard medicine to take, but it is God's word, and let me share it. It says in Corinthians, it's actually 1 Corinthians 7, 1 Corinthians 7. If you do marry, you have not sinned. And if a betrothed woman marries, she has not sinned. Yet those who marry will have worldly troubles, and I would spare you that. This is what I mean, brothers. The appointed time is growing very short. From now on, let those who have wives live as though they had none, and those who mourn as though they were not mourning, and those who rejoice as though they were not rejoicing, and those who buy as though they had no goods, and those who deal with the world as though they had no dealings with it. For the present form of this world is passing away. And then a verse Chris Keith brought up last night on the news unit channel. This know also, that in the last days perilous times shall come. For men shall be lovers of their own selves, covetous, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, without natural affection, truce breakers, false accusers, incontinent, fierce, despisers of those that are good, traitors, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure more than lovers of God, having a form of godliness, but denying the power thereof. From such turn away. For this sort are they which creep into houses and leave captive silly women laid with sins, led away with diverse lusts, ever learning and never able to come to the knowledge of truth. Now as Jannes and Jambres withstood Moses, so do these also resist the truth, men of corrupt minds, reprobate concerning the faith. But they shall proceed no further, for their folly shall be manifest unto all men, as theirs also was. And so, why was I reading this passage? In the discussion last night, we were talking, it came up because I was talking about how there, and I had a video clip on psychic epidemics. That's the term, psychic epidemics. And I'd ask if some of the moderators could deal with the bots, that would help. Then I don't get so distracted. I keep getting a bot attack here. Worst comes to worst, I just will publish videos and we won't have a side chat anymore, which would be kind of a bummer that the channel gets shut down by these internet vandals. But in any case, I mean, not the channel, but side chats get shut down. The channel will continue, God willing. These psychic epidemics. So what's one example? Anorexia. Anorexia, it really only affects women. I'm sure we could find exceptions, but really affects women. Same with bulimia. Anorexia is just the desire to just keep getting thin, and the woman keeps getting thinner and thinner, and she keeps insisting she's fat. And one way that they found out, if you get two anorexics together in a hospital ward, you have to be very careful, because they could, rather than help each other, they'll start to reinforce each other's behavior. So they could be so thin, skinny thin, that their life is in peril, but they're insisting they're fat. And if someone encounters them and reinforces that, it just tends to reinforce itself. So what ends up happening is on the internet, through social media, these anorexics start reinforcing that behavior and that mindset. And one thing that came out in that is that there is something in the way that people are wired. And in the case of anorexia, the women are wired to kind of take on the pain of their friends and ruminate on it and make it their own. And that they're willing to suspend reality to stay a part of the team. So this social bond is so strong that they'll suspend reality. They'll insist that they're fat when they're actually just skinny thin and risk of dying. It happened to Karen Carpenter, a famous singer and musician. But she was pointing out this leads to all sorts of other, it's not just limited to anorexia, where bad behaviors can become pandemic, especially now in the era of social media. And so what does that have to do with this verse? When I started talking about that study, Chris Keith said, that reminded him of this passage. For of this sort are they which creep into houses and lead captive silly women laden with sins, led away with diverse lusts. And Chris Keith then showed a clip by Ray Comfort that was commenting on all, if you look at a lot of daytime TV, it's doing exactly that. You look at all the bad behavior that you would not want young women modeling, or for that matter, young men, but especially young women. And that's what gets the ratings. All these shows are just poisoning the mind. And as I pondered this, I said, Lord, could we be getting close to the end times? And, when I was a younger Christian, I didn't know what to do with this passage. It talked about perilous times shall come. Men will be lovers of their own selves, covetous. And this is just a very dark picture. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with that. I just, I want to just live happily ever after and live in a world that's kind of free from pain. So when we read Sheldon Vonnegut here, during his pagan years before becoming a Christian and before his wife died, he said, our dedication to love and beauty, our trust in reason, and our goal of the good life. Our goal of the good life. And that's what I wanted. And I thought, well, God's a good God. He's going to give that to me. All right. So, I mean, again, this is when I was young, and I figured I believed in God, and he does good things. And therefore, I believed he's going to give me the good life on this earth. And I couldn't comprehend passages like that. I didn't know what to do with it. But now that I'm older, I'm very concerned about where society will end. Will this be a place, will this, if things get that bad, the question of who to marry or who not to marry kind of becomes like inconsequential in the scheme of things. So I think if this passage describes where civilization might be headed, and maybe even in the not too distant future, then even though this passage was written for the Corinthians, I accept that God had us in mind when Paul was writing this letter to the Corinthians. So there were worldly troubles that Paul was cautioning them with. And I will point, it's only fair to point out, in Paul's epistles to Timothy, he's actually encouraging widows to marry and have children. So it would seem that his letter to Corinthians was for a specific set of problems and a specific distress, because the attitude was a little different in Paul's epistle to Timothy. But still, there's a principle here that's laid out, and I'll just read it. It says here, this is what I mean, brothers. The appointed time has grown very short. From now on, let those who have wives live as though they had none, and those who mourn as though they were not mourning, and those who rejoice as though they were not rejoicing, and those who buy as though they had no goods, and those who deal with the world as though they had no dealings with it. For the present form of this world is passing away. So, do I have an answer of how, should people marry or not? I'm just going to point to the Bible, and I think it's on a case-by-case basis. God will call some to marriage, some not, and I don't know where I stand in that spectrum. So, some time ago I said I was going to cover a passage from James Dobson, and this really doesn't have anything to do with, has nothing to do with anything else I said. I just thought it was kind of interesting, and I promised I'd read it. So I will, since it's Valentine's Day, and I have some reflections on this. Let's see. All right. This is James Dobson's Love Must Be Tough. I mean, I love reading. I enjoy reading this passage. It's very insightful. An entire book could be written on the love must be tough principles as related to unmarried men and women. The problem, quite frankly, is that many singles want so desperately to be married that they violate the laws of freedom and respect in romantic relationships. And I laid out the reasons I think that is the case. Fundamentally, it's not our culture or anything. It's just written in our biology. And we're always longing for Eden. So this idea of this desperate longing, it's going to be hard to run away from. It's part of the curse. Many singles want so desperately to be married that they violate the laws of freedom and respect in romantic relationships. That is like turning a fire hose on a flickering flame, and all that remains is black smoke and ashes. I heard of one young man who was determined to win the affection of a girl who refused to even see him. He decided that the way to her heart was through the mail, so he began writing her a love letter every day. When she did not respond, he increased his output to 3 notes every 24 hours. In all, he wrote her more than 700 letters, and she married the postman. Okay, that may be an apocryphal story, all right, but this one is reported in the newspapers, the next account. That is the way the system works. Romantic love is one of those rare human endeavors that succeeds best when it requires the least effort. Those who work the hardest at it are the most likely to fail. And speaking of people who try harder, no one beats a dude named Keith Ruff, whose story was told in the Los Angeles Times. February 21st, 1982, by Betty Cuniberti. The headline read, "Man spends $20,000 trying to win the hand of the girl who can say no." In fact, $20,000 a day would be, oh boy, what, 100,000? This is big money. A love-struck man, and this is from the article, a love-struck man holed up in a $200 a day Washington hotel has spent, at latest estimate, close to $20,000 demonstrating to his beloved that he won't take no for an answer to his marriage proposal. On bended knee on Christmas Day, 35-year-old Keith Ruff, once a stockbroker in Beverly Hills, proposed marriage to 20-year-old Karine Bolstein, a cocktail waitress at a Washington restaurant. He met her in a shoe store last summer. The pair had gone out a few times over a 2-month period before the proposal. To his proposal, she looked down and said, "No." Since then, Ruff has remained in Washington and demonstrated his wish that she reconsider by sending her everything but a partridge in a pear tree. That may be next. He is, he thinks, close to spending all of my money. I'm not an Arab sheik. Shower of gifts. The tokens of his affection include a Learjet placed on standby at the airport in case she wanted to ride around. Between 3,000 and 5,000 flowers. A limousine equipped with a bar and television parked outside her door. A gold ring. $200 worth of champagne. Catered lobster dinners. Musicians to serenade her. A clown to amuse her younger brother. A man dressed as Prince Charming bearing a glass slipper. Cookies, candy, and perfume. Sandwich wearers walking around her home and the restaurant where Bolstein works. Sandwich sign wearers. Okay, so that's a guy with a poster like a sandwich over his body. Oh boy. Conveying the message, Mr. Dennis Keith Ruff loves Miss Corrine Bolstein. Balloons, which she promptly popped. Oh, that was cruel. What else would she do? Said the undaunted Ruff. The house was so full of flowers, there was no room to walk around. For her father, a basket of nuts and $300 worth of cigars to pass out to his friends at the Labor Department. It may sound goofy, but I like him. For her mother, flowers at the French embassy where she works. I don't think her mother likes me. She called the police. I'm sorry. She called the police. Ruff said, but I'll keep sending gifts to her also. How could anyone be so mad? For her parents, a stepladder, so they might look at the relationship from a different angle. Unsurprisingly, Ruff said he was very, very strange. He has a very, very strange monetary situation. He has not worked in some time, describing himself as being of independent means. I don't care how many job offers I get. I'm not interested in any of them, Ruff said. I'd rather think about her than sit at a job. He said he will spend his last dime and will beg for money if he has to, so that he will keep on trying for 10 years, 20 years. I'll ask her to marry me 50,000 times. Nothing stops him. It doesn't matter how many times she says no. I will do everything in my power that's not absurd or against reasonable law. I wouldn't stop if she became a nun. I've never felt this way before. Bolstein, meanwhile, said she is flattered, but too young to get married. She also said the house looks like a funeral parlor. Ruff said, I don't want to force her to love me, but I can't stop. Maybe this makes her nervous, but at least she gets the smile along with being nervous. Anybody would like it somewhat. Ruff said many people he talks to are skeptical. People would say my love is strange, he said, but our whole society is falling apart because of the way people love. What is dating? Some guy putting his paws all over you? My friend in LA knows how many women I've gone out with. I didn't like being a womanizer. I believe in the old values. I found the woman I love. Ruff said he spends a lot of time in his hotel room planning what to do next and occasionally crying. Bolstein, meanwhile, has been getting asked for her autograph. Bolstein, meanwhile, has been getting asked for her autograph where she works and has had a drink there named after her, a concoction of gin, vodka, and rum entitled She Won't. Ruff said Bolstein called him once, but I hung up on her. I didn't like what she said. Reality to me is disturbing, Ruff said. I'd rather close my eyes and see her face. Fantasy is where I'm living. I'm living with hope and some very big bills. Okay, I'm sorry to laugh. I mean, because sometimes this is so bad. This is really pathetic on his part. But you know, that's a man trying to get happily ever after in this life, and sometimes it's easier to just chase after a fantasy. You know, Marcel Proust was saying, we may not be in love with the person, but what we imagine them to be, and I think that's the case here, big time. So now this is Dr. Dobson speaking. There are several things old Ruff needs to know about women, assuming Miss Bolstein has gotten the message across by now. He could cry in his hotel room for the next 50 years without generating the tiniest bit of sympathy from her. And that jet airplane doesn't mean a hill of beans to her either. Very few women are attracted to sniveling men who crawl, who bribe, who whine and make donkeys of themselves in view of the whole world. Tell me, who wants to marry an unambitious weirdo who grovels in the dirt like a whipped puppy? Goodbye romance. Hello, poorhouse. On a much smaller scale, of course, the same mistake is made by singles in other places. They reveal their hopes and dreams too early in the game and scare the socks off potential lovers. Divorcees fall into the same trap, especially single women who need a man to support them and their children. Yeah. Male candidates for that assignment are rarities and are sometimes recruited like all-American athletes. I've seen no better illustration than the following item, also appearing in the Los Angeles Times. It was submitted to Virginia Duty Klein for use in her column, Living with Divorce. Question: I am a recently divorced professional man with an unusual problem. I hope you can help me. A woman I dated once called me before I even had a chance to make a second date with her and wanted to know why I hadn't called her again. After our second date, she began to call almost daily with offers for dinner, something funny she'd read and thought I'd enjoy, etc. The crazy part is that this same routine has started with another woman. I'm just beginning to ask out. If such behavior is typical, maybe I should have stayed married. How do I extricate myself from this frenzied dating and having a nice, quiet social life? You know, I mean, goodness, I feel for women who are divorced and have kids, and you know, something you don't want to do is lead them on. Get yourself in. It could be some real hurt feelings, and yet, you know, my heart goes out to them. I mean, you know, I have relatives that are in that situation. Divorced single mothers, it's rough. I mean, you know, my heart goes out to those situations. There's sadly divorce is kind of rampant in my immediate and extended family, so I see a lot of this. It's sad. It's very sad. Okay, so I'll just continue. Isn't it obvious what is occurring here? The women being dated by this professional man are chasing him like a hound after a rabbit, and predictably his natural impulse is to run. If they are interested in pulling him toward them, they simply must not invade his territory. Instead, they should maintain a sense of decorum in the response to him. I attempted to explain the how-to of this recommendation during the mid-70s when I was writing What Wives Wish Their Husbands Knew About Women. what wives wish their husbands knew about women. The concepts I formulated then have withstood intensive scrutiny since that time and have provided the foundation for the book you are reading. And the book I'm reading is Love Must Be Tough. Love Must Be Tough. This is what I wrote. It is of highest priority to maintain a distinct element of dignity and self-respect in all romantic encounters. I have observed that many relationships suffer from a failure to recognize a universal characteristic of human nature. We value what we are fortunate to get. We discredit that which we are with which we are stuck. Let me read that again. We value that which we are fortunate to get. We discredit that with which we are stuck. We lust for the very thing which is beyond our grasp. We disdain that same item when it becomes a permanent possession. We lust for the very thing which is beyond our grasp. We disdain that same item when it becomes a permanent possession. No toy is ever as much fun to play with as it appeared to a wide-eyed child in the store. Seldom does an expensive automobile provide the satisfaction anticipated by the man who dreamed of its ownership. This principle is even more dramatically accurate in romantic affairs, particularly with reference to men. Let's look at the extreme case of Don Juan, the perpetual lover who buzzes from one feminine flower to another. His heart throbs and pants after the elusive princess who drops her glass slipper as she flees. Every ounce of energy is focused on her capture. However, the intensity of his desire is dependent on her unavailability. However, the intensity of his desire is dependent on her unavailability. The moment his passionate dreams materialize, he begins to ask himself, is this what I really want? Farther down the line, as the relationship progresses toward the routine circumstances of everyday life, he's attracted by new princesses and begins to wonder how he can escape the older model. Now, I would not imply that all men, or even the majority of them, are as exploitative and intemperate and impermanent as the gadabout I described. But to a lesser degree, most men and women are impelled by the same urges. Now, Dr. Dobson's a clinical psychologist, so he sees a lot of this. How many times have I been a bored, tired, how many times have I seen a bored, tired relationship become a torrent of desire and longing the moment one partner rejects the other and walks out? Yes, I told you he's a clinical psychologist. He sees this. How many times have I seen a bored, tired relationship become a torrent of desire and longing the moment one partner rejects the other and walks out? After years of apathy, the dumpee suddenly burns with romantic desire and desperate hope. This principle hits even closer to home for me at this moment. Right now, as I'm writing these words, I'm sitting in the waiting room of a large hospital while my wife is undergoing major abdominal surgery. I'm writing to ease my tension and anxiety. While I have always been close to Shirley, that's his wife, Shirley is his wife. I have a picture. Yeah, that's her. That's Dr. Dobson and Shirley Dobson. My appreciation and tender love for her are maximal this morning. Less than 5 minutes ago, a surgeon emerged from the operating room with a grim face, informing the man near me that his wife is consumed with cancer. He spoke in unguarded terms of the unfavorable pathological report and the malignant infestation. I'll be speaking to Shirley's surgeon within the hour, and my vulnerability is keenly felt. While my love for my wife has never flagged through our 14 years together, it has rarely been as intense as this moment of threat. You see, not only are our emotions affected by the challenge of pursuit, but also by the possibility of irrevocable loss. The surgeon arrived as I was writing the sentence above, saying my wife came through the operation with no complications and the pathologist recognized no abnormal tissue. I am indeed grateful. I am indeed a grateful man. My deepest sympathy is with the less fortunate family whose tragedy I witnessed today. And let me pause a little bit. One reason this topic is hitting home is there's been a lot of death among my family and friends, particularly of husbands predeceasing their wives of like 50 years. People in my extended family, a husband died and the wife was left alone after 50 years. It affected me because these are really sweet women, and you just wouldn't wish anything like that on anyone. My sister's been married. I was a late baby. My sister's much older than I am. And the middle child, my sister, Veronica, her husband, she and her husband have been married over 50 years, and he's very sickly. So this topic about the honeymoon that should have lasted forever, I was there at her wedding over 50 years ago, and time has just flown, and it's like, yeah, 50 years isn't enough. And so I'm just sharing here as Dr. Dobson was writing this, those thoughts came to mind, how precious life is and how precious love is if you find it. A better example of fickle emotions is illustrated by my early relationship with Shirley. When we first met, she was a lowly sophomore in college and I was a lofty senior. I viewed myself as a big man on campus, and my relationship with this young co-ed mattered little to me. She in turn had been very successful with boys, and she was greatly challenged by the independence I demonstrated. She wanted to win me primarily because she wasn't sure she could, but her enthusiasm inhibited my own interest in return. After graduation, we had one of those lengthy conversations well known to lovers the world over, when I said I wanted her to date other fellows while I was in the Army because I didn't plan to get married soon. I'll never forget her reaction. I expected Shirley to cry and hold on to me. Instead, she said, I've been thinking the same thoughts, and I would like to date other guys. Why don't we just go our separate ways for now? Her answer rocked me. For the first time in our relationship, she was moving away from me. What I didn't know was Shirley stoically closed her front door and then cried all night. Oh my goodness. She played him. Her answer rocked me. For the first time in our relationship, she was moving away from me. What I didn't know was that Shirley stoically closed her front door and then cried all night. I went away to the Army and returned to the University of Southern California for my graduate training. By this time, Shirley was an exalted senior and I was a collegiate has-been. She was homecoming queen, senior class president, a member of Who's Who in American colleges and universities, and one of the most popular girls in her class. Whoa, homecoming queen. And I don't know what college that was, but anyway, I went, as might be expected, she suddenly looked very attractive to me. I began to call several times a day. Complain about who she was spending her time with, and try to find ways to please my dream girl. However, the moment Shirley saw my enthusiasm and anxiety, her affection began to die. Gone was the challenge which had attracted her 2 years before. Instead, I had become just another fellow pounding on her door and asking for favors. One day after a particularly uninspiring date, I sat down at the desk and spent 2 solid hours thinking about what was happening. And during the course of the introspection, I realized the mistake I was making. A light flashed in my head, and I grabbed a pen and wrote 10 changes I was going to make in our relationship. First, I was determined to demonstrate self-respect and dignity, even if I lost the one I now love so deeply. Second, I decided to convey this attitude every time I got the chance. I'm going somewhere in life, and I'm anxious to get there. I love you and hope you choose to go with me. If you do, I'll give myself to you and try to make you happy. However, if you choose not to make the journey with me, then I can't force my will on you. The decision is yours and I'll accept it. There were other elements to my new manner, but they all centered on self-confidence and independence. The first night I applied the new formula was one of the most thrilling experiences of my life. The girl who is now my wife saw me starting to slip away on that evening, and she reacted with alarm. We were riding in silence in my car, and Shirley asked me to pull over to the curb and stop. When I did, she put her arms around my neck and said, "I'm afraid I'm losing you, and I don't know why. Do you still love me?" I noticed by the reflected light of the moon that she had tears in her eyes. She obviously didn't hear my thumping heart as I made a little speech about my solitary journey in life. You see, I had reestablished the challenge for Shirley, and she responded beautifully. The psychological force which produced our seesaw relationship is an important one, since it is almost universal in human nature. Forgive the redundancy, but I must restate the principle. We crave that which we can't attain, but we disrespect that which we can't escape. This axiom is particularly relevant in romantic matters and has probably influenced your love life too. So with that, I hope you've enjoyed this evening. That was a compelling passage from a clinical psychologist. And maybe in days gone by that would have occupied my thoughts more. Honestly, the world is such a mess now. These considerations seem to pale in comparison to the problems we face and how we need to navigate life. And I haven't figured it out, and maybe together we'll pray to the Lord and He'll help us figure out how to live our lives. And to that end, I'm hoping to share more stuff from Jordan Peterson. So gentlemen, thank you so much for hearing me out. And we'll resume our regular nerd programming on this channel starting Wednesday. Tomorrow we'll have an after show with Cindy Lincoln as she will comment on the horrors of Hovind. People are asking, why am I doing this? I think I'm trying to steer people to better creationism, like Rob Stadler, John Sanford, etc. And we should care for victims, and Cindy is a victim. And I'm going to recommend to her that she builds friendships with people like Jennifer Greenberg, victims of clergy abuse, because what's very damaging to Christian faith is when someone goes through an ordeal like that, they may end up rejecting the faith. I'm pleased to convey, it seems she's holding on to the faith, and I want her to be supported. She's been a valuable asset to this channel. She asks a lot of questions, as I'm hoping she'll get retrained in good creationism as far as the science is concerned. So with that, Lord willing, till we meet again, take care and God bless you. Have a good evening. Good night.